There's a common mistake most Angular developers do while working with Angular routing and creating a navbar. And we have made the same mistake, which is we don't know which path is active when we are on a particular route. And this is not a CSS bug. We'll fix that. And we'll also look at the property of a router that trips even senior developers. Dynamic routes with parameters and a feature called withComponentInputBinding. We'll also see finally why understanding route order is necessary. Let's start. So we are in our poster Angular application and our development server is up and running. And we have the components that is required for our navigation, the header component. And we also have the post list component, which is to show all the posts. And within that we have the postcard component for each particular post. Okay. Now inside the header component, we have added the navigation over here. Okay. Now to fix this, we have the RouterLinkActive option. RouterLinkActive basically adds a CSS class to a particular route. Now if I have the blank path over here and if I want to show the user that this particular route is active, then that is done using the RouterLinkActive. Let's add the RouterLinkActive over here, the RouterLinkActive, and I'll add the active class. This basically is a class which I can add to our CSS or HCSS file, and that class will be added to this particular anchor tab. And we'll also add the RouterLinkActive to our add post route. And once we have added this RouterLinkActive, we also need to import this in our component tease file. Okay. So that is already imported when I have added the RouterLinkActive inside our header.html. And once we save this, we need an active class that should be added in our header.scss file. And I'll add the active class over here. Now active class, basically I want to have the same navigation or the same background color when the user is active. Okay, so I'll quickly add the active class with the help of GitHub Copilot. And once we have added the active class, now if I go to our browser and you see if I click on the all post, the all post route is active. But if I click on the add post, you see both these options or both these routes are active. Why this is so? Because we have added a path that is related to the blank path to all route. Okay. And we have added another path which is /add to the add post component. Okay. But all the routes starts with a blank slash. That now on any route you go, the active class will be added, but that active class will also be added to the blank slash or the default route that we have added for the post list component. Okay, this is added automatically to the route. You don't need a manual subscription for that. Angular handles everything for us. For example, creating a class and adding it to our route which is active. Now every link you visit, the slash path or the blank path will be added by default to that, right? So the active class will be added to all the routes that you visit and the blank path as well. Now we can fix that. There is an option Angular provides us, and the active class is added to all the routes. We don't need any manual subscription for that. Angular handles it for us, and this can also be applied to a parent class. For example, over here you can apply the RouterLinkActive to a parent. For example, if you have a list over here, you can apply the RouterLinkActive or the active class to that list, provided that any element that you have added RouterLink, the parent will have the access to the RouterLinkActive class. The fix is basically a simple. You have another option inside your RouterLinkActive, that is RouterLinkActiveOptions. Okay. Now the RouterLinkActiveOptions provide us the options where you can add the exact path or the match the exact path. If I add the exact as true over here, okay. Now the exact true means the URL should exactly match this path. Okay. Now whenever user navigates to the all posts, the default path, which is our blank path, should be navigated and should be matched directly. Now if I go on the all post over here, you see all post path is matched, the default path is matched, and we can see the all post navigation active. Now if I click on the add post, now the add post route is active. So this is how you can add the router link options. There's a catch over here. Most of the developers add RouterLinkActiveOptions exact as true on the all routes, right? So you should always avoid this thing. You should only add the exact as true on the default path. Now the next thing that I want to do over here is that if I click on any post over here, the user should be navigated to the detail post. Okay. Now the detail post, we do not have any component with the detail post. So I'll create a component which is a post detail component. I'll add ng generate component and the post and detail component. Now once this post detail component is created, I'll head over to our routes.ts file. Okay. Now our idea is basically to go on a particular post and fetch that details from the API. Okay. If I click on the post 1 or the second post, the details would be collected from the API or any other source, and we should see all the details of that particular post. So we'll fetch the post detail based on the IDs. Now let's check what is the IDs of these posts. If I click on the post list component, we have the IDs as 1 and 2, right? So I can navigate to this particular IDs using the routes. If I click on the app.route.ts file, and I can add a path over here that goes to our post detail component, and this post detail component will have the details of that particular post. Now if I add one over here, it will go to the first post and it will fetch the details of that particular first post. Okay, let's go in our browser, and the create post should not be there. It should be a post detail component. Okay, now let's go in our browser and let's add a route over here. The route is basically 1. Now you see the post detail works is shown, that is coming from the post detail component. And we can also add the path for the second post, but this is not a valid idea to create a route for all the post details. So for this you have a dynamic path. Dynamic path basically creates a variable for our path. So dynamic path basically starts with a colon. So I'll add a variable over here. The variable is the ID that I want to navigate the users to. The ID is the variable which will have all the post detail IDs. So once I go on any particular ID, that post ID will be collected into this ID variable. And this is a parameter. Now there are conditions to add a valid parameters. They should always start with a letter and can only contain numbers, letters, underscore and hyphens. No spaces, no special characters. Now if I go to our route and add a 2 over here, now 2 is our ID of the second post, and we go to our post detail component. Here the problem is we should not always move to the URL and navigate from there. We should have a navigation approach from where when we click on a particular post, the user should be navigated to that particular route or the particular post detail. So for that we'll move to the postcard component. Postcard component is basically all the cards that you see inside our post list component. And on the click of the post card, we will navigate the user to that particular post detail component. So I'll add a click event over here. Okay. So once I have added the click event, I want to call the function which should reside in our postcard.ts file. The function will be a view detail. Okay. Now view detail is a function that should be added inside our postcard.ts file. So I'll add a post view detail function over here. After adding the view detail function, I want the user to be navigated, right? So basically we want Angular to navigate from this page to another page. So for that we have the router object that Angular provides to us, and that can be injected using the inject function. Okay, the inject, and we'll add the router. Okay, now this router is coming from the @Angular router. Okay, once I have injected this router, I can call the navigate function on this router. Okay, so this is the function that I want to call, this.router.navigate, and navigate to that particular post. Okay, so this is the function which is added by the GitHub Copilot. So I'll accept that. Let's go in our browser, and if I go on to all posts, and if I click on any post, you see we are navigated to that particular post detail component. Okay, if now we have passed the ID from here, how will I get the ID inside our post detail component? Because we need to pass this detail to the API call or any source where we want to fetch the details based on the ID. So to get the ID, in the earlier versions of Angular, we were using the router snapshot and the activated route and all that. But now in the latest version of Angular, these all are not required. We have the simple features in Angular that captures the route parameters using the input. The same input that we have been using for the parent-child communication. and that can be added to our route configuration. If I go to the app.config routes, okay, here we can call that function with component input binding, that is with component input binding. Okay, once we added this function inside our provide router definition, now we can go to our post detail component, and from the post detail component we can directly get the parameters using the input. Now there is an edge case over here. If your component has an input named ID for the parent component to pass in the data, and the route also has the ID parameter, the with component input binding will override the parent's value with the route parameters. This is a real conflict that can produce very confusing bugs. Rename one of them or use the activated route approach for that specific case. With component input binding plays beautifully with Angular signals. So we will not use add input over here, we will directly use the signal inputs. So I'll add the ID variable over here. The ID variable is basically the data that is coming from the parameters. So I'll add the signal input over here. The signal input basically captures that particular route parameters. So how will we know the ID will have the parameters value? We can console that. I'll add the implements on init over here. Okay. So once I implement the on init, I'll add the function ng-on-init and I'll add the console over here. Okay, with the post ID, the ID that is coming from the route parameters. Now after adding all of these details, if I go in our browser and click on the all post, if I open the developer console and click on any post, you see the post IDs one is being shown, that is coming from the route parameters. Now if I click on the second post, I get the ID from the parameters as the store, and that ID is the ID of the second post. Okay, so this is how with component input binding works. You can pass the data from any of your component into a parameter, and you can get the parameters of the route using this feature called with component input binding. Now inside our app.route.ts file, Angular uses some first match wins strategy. It walks your routes array from the top to the bottom and stops at the first route that matches. This sounds simple until it silently swallows one of your routes. Here is the bug, watch closely. If I add the dynamic parameter above the add parameter or the above the route, and if I head over to our browser and if I click on the add post, you see the post detail works is shown, right? Even if I click on the add post and we are on the add post route. But why we are seeing the post detail component? This is where understanding the route order is necessary. Your route order should always have the static path first and the dynamic path later. Because the add string over here is perfectly valid for the ID parameter. Angular matches this ID first, passes add as the ID, and your add post or create post component is completely unreachable. No error, no warning, just the wrong component and the wrong order. Here's the golden rule. Order routes from the most specific to the least specific. Static path beats the dynamic paths. Dynamic parameters beats wildcards. So wildcards is always the last, as I mentioned in our last video. With route order logged in, let's quickly summarize everything. Remember the nav bug from the very start of the video, the one where the wrong link was highlighted? That was RouterLinkActive without the RouterLinkOptions exact true on the all post link. Now you know exactly why it happens and exactly how to fix it. RouterLinkActive sends a CSS class to your nav links automatically when the route is active. No manual logic is needed. RouterLinkActiveOptions with exact true is required on your blank path, otherwise it's always active. We also seen the dynamic route with the parameters names in the path. The route order is everything: static routes before the dynamic routes before the wildcards, and the wildcards always the last. With component input binding lets you read the route params, query params and route data directly through the input. No activated route injection is needed, but you should watch for name collisions. If this saved you from one of these bugs, do me a favor, hit that like button. It genuinely helps the algorithm surface this video to the developers who need it. In our next video, we'll be seeing the title and the title strategy, a service that lets you set a global title format across your entire application without touching individual routes. Subscribe so you can catch it. I'll see you in the next video.